Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we're meeting with Smooth On, and it should be a lot of fun. They're going to go over quite a few molding and casting different techniques and demonstrate what can be done with their materials. Today, right now, we're meeting with Heather, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to her, and she can get started.
Okay. Thanks, Rebecca. I really appreciate you inviting Smooth On and myself to participate in your Artoberfest event.
Yeah.
So, like she said, my name's Heather. I've been working here at Smooth On for about 10 years. That doesn't mean that I know everything. It means that I continually try to learn. That's one of the best things about it, is that every day we're learning a little bit more, but we can use techniques and knowledge, about mold making and casting to have successful projects. Smooth On's actually, if you haven't heard about Smooth On's been around since 1895.
Oh,
so
wow.
Quite some time. Yeah.
Yes.
Longer than us, pretty much. But, for quite some time. But we are actually a leading manufacturer of mold making and casting materials like silicone rubber, urethane resin, urethane expanding foam, you name it, accessories that go along with mold making and casting, like colorants, fillers, effects powders, et cetera, et cetera. It could be, things like silicone rubber, like we were talking about, is a really probably one of the most popular mold making materials. It's flexible. It makes it really great for mold making and casting. You can also use urethane rubbers, which are probably the next popular, and then even some urethane resins and other materials. But if someone's not familiar with what mold making and casting is, I'll try to give like just a quick description about it.
Yeah.
So, just because to me, when I started, I didn't have too much knowledge of it. I learned along the way, and like everyone, you have experiences that sometimes don't work, but I consider them learning experiences, and it really propels you forward for success later. But
definitely.
So if you're making a mold, like what is it, molding or mold making, you usually have some type of original object. An object could be something that you bought, you inherited, you picked up off the floor, or maybe you're an artist and you sculpted it. So you have something like this, it's an original object. I want to make more than one of these. That's why I want to make a mold. And so the mold is actually what we would call like a reverse or a negative of the original, which is the positive. And so when you apply the mold material, like I said, usually a mold rubber on top of the original piece, when you remove it, what you're left with is a negative or a reverse. And so into that, you make castings, which is where the mold making and casting. So when you pour into it, usually it's some type of liquid material. When you pour into the mold cavity, you're pouring the liquid material, you are actually performing the act of casting. And then when the piece is removed, when it's either dried or cured, depending on the material, you have a casting. So after you've done the molding, you have a mold. When you're done with the casting, you have a cast. And so you can usually reuse many molds, reuse a mold many times. That's the idea of it. It doesn't have a lifetime that's basically infinity. There is usually an end of life of a mold, but they, especially like our silicone rubbers, they can last for a very long time, depending on what you put into them, etc. So, looking at different things on the table that I've kind of laid out here, I wanted to give you guys an idea of what type of applications our mold making materials are used for. Like, why would you want to make a mold? You actually might not even realize it, but you probably have molds at your house right now. So if you think about your kitchen and you think about an ice cube tray, you think about a muffin tin, those are actually molds. You think about it, you've got the mold, which is like your ice cube tray. You put water in it, you're casting into that, and then you remove the ice cubes, which are the castings. So if you think about it in those terms, it kind of helps, for me anyway. I like to relate everything to cooking. It helps kind of understand what the mold is doing. And so most people are familiar with something as simple as that. But things like this, like you see this helmet, you can use our materials for things like cosplay, props, like this hammer here. You can also, see different types of movies and TV shows that pretty much almost everyone that you've seen probably has used our materials in some sort of way. You can also use it for reproducing a sculpture. So someone may have carved this, sculpted it out of clay, whatever, and they want to make a reproduction of it. So that's a sculpture. You can use it for hobbies, things like aquariums, zoos. So here's a little coral. They don't always use real or live things. Sometimes they have to make reproductions, you know, for all over the world.
Yeah.
This little bracelet that I have on, which is like my favorite color, it was actually made from a bracelet that was mine that I thought was cool. And I just made a mold and made reproductions because here's another one.
That's
So
awesome.
jewelry making is popular. You see a lot of people selling their designs online. So you can use it for hobby, for business, for all types of things. This is a little beautiful little soap. You can make actual soaps for use, decorative soaps, things like prototyping. Here's a little gear or an invention, something that you've come up with. You know, our materials are really great for that type of thing. Other hobbies like candle making. Here's a wonderful little candle. Things like scale modeling. It could be trains. It could be tabletop gaming. Things like taxidermy. I mean, honestly, you could just go on and on and on with how our materials are actually involved in people's lives, and from something like medical simulation, learning how to suture, you know, not on a real body, but learning how to do that, or something that could go up into, you know, space. The possibilities are really endless and are only limited by your imagination.
Yeah.
So
I did have a
so
couple
yeah,
people.
yeah,
One person was asking if it's possible to make a mold for pennies, nickels, and dimes.
yeah. The
Yeah.
question was, can you make molds of pennies, nickels, and dimes? Yes, actually, almost pretty much close to anything. I can't say everything, but I will say almost everything you can. You just have to make a decision about compatibility. Is whatever you're making, whether it's a coin, is it compatible with the mold material? Is it something that you want to make a mold of both sides of it? And that kind of leads us into me showing you some of the different types of molds that you can make. So I put some out on the table just to give examples. And
Yeah.
so, you know, the answer to that is yes. So for instance, this is one of our silicone molds, and you can kind of see that there's the negative cavity that I was talking about, the hollow, the negative or the reverse. And this is what we would call like a simple block mold. This is probably one of the gateways into mold making and casting. And I'm going to demonstrate how to make something like this in just a little while. But basically, if I were to make a mold of one side of the piece, of the coin or whatever it may be, this is ideal for something like that. Something that has a low relief, something like this where I have a flat bottom. You can see it's flat, and I'll give you an idea of how molds can be made in just a little. But flat piece, there's not really much depth to it. This could technically be a coin with a raised area, and it's really ideal for a block style mold. If you decide to yourself, that's not good enough, I want to make a mold of both sides, I want to capture front and back, side, you know, left, right, all of it, then you would move to something like this, which is what we would call a multi-part or a two-part mold. This is another one of our silicones. And let me just show you. I left the casting inside for your viewing pleasure. So you can kind of see here's a two-part mold. It's a rubber mold. The little dots that you see, you'll see some are male and some are female. Those are called registration keys. They actually help, if you can see it come together, really helps with alignment. It virtually disappears. So you don't get seam lines, or you have very few seam lines. That's a pour spout where you would pour the material. Usually you'd put some straps around it to hold it together so the material doesn't leak out. But that way I can capture actually both sides, which is really nice. So I get both sides of a piece as opposed to one piece. You can kind of see the depth there, which is actually really cool. And it's just another way of making a mold. You know, you might not want to do something where you split the mold completely like that. You might do something like this mold, which is still a pour-on style mold. These are all pour-on block molds. And it doesn't have to be a block. It could be a circular shape. But if I have a piece that might be a little more complex, I might split it wide open. And if I split it open on the sides, I didn't make registration keys ahead of time like I did with the other one, but the way that I cut it allows me to make it virtually seamless with when I pour my casting. And actually this piece right here, this finger coral is basically what was in there, which it's a little bit of a complex piece. I'm not quite sure if you can see it all, but it has a little finger in it, which is a little weird thumb, which made it a little harder to get out, which is why we needed to make a mold like this. So in looking at these types of materials, there's different styles of molds that you can make. There's another type of mold that you can make that's very popular. It's called a brush-on style mold. So like these, the pour-on, you're literally mixing and pouring. If you're making a type of mold that's a brush-on style, I'll show you an example. The brush-on style mold is usually much, much thinner. And I'm going to open this up. So if you can see inside, this is actually it right here. It's very thin compared to, you can see it's a little floppy compared to the other ones that I was holding.
Yeah.
And so this is really good for things that are a little more complex, in deciding, do I do a brush on? Do I do a pour on? What do I want to do? Sometimes you want to do a pour on because it makes life easier, but because your piece may be three-dimensional, have undercuts, areas where materials could get stuck and you can't demold it or remove it, you might be forced to make a brush on. If I'm making a piece as tall as me, which isn't terribly tall, but tall enough, do you really want to have a giant block of rubber, or do you want to have one that's more thin and easier to handle?
Yeah.
You might also decide when you're making a mold, what's my budget? I have to think about that. Am I pouring a giant block mold, which is a little more thick, usually about a 1/2 inch? Or do I want to save a little bit of money and use something like this, which is maybe anywhere from 1/8 to 3/8 of an inch, depending on the project? You still capture all the detail no matter what. However, it's so flimsy, it can't really hold its shape because you can kind of see I can just flop it around. This is called a support shell or a mother mold. And so it seats in there perfectly. And so when I make my casting, it actually holds its shape. And this one, the pour spout is here. So I would put straps on this and I would pour into it. And then actually what I got out of it was this guy right here, which is a sculpture. And so it is a little complex, kind of like, how am I going to get this out? It's got some depth to it. There's undercuts and things like that. So it made more sense for something like this rather than have a giant block to make this. So again, it does depend when you're selecting on a couple things, budget, the size of your piece, the complexity of your piece, and things like that. However, sometimes you do have some flexibility in what you want to do, but those are some of the main reasons why you would choose a brush on over a pour on. As far as deciding, like, which mold rubber, because we have hundreds of products. You can always call our tech support line if you have project questions, because we can listen to your application or what you would like to try to do. Whether you're somebody new or somebody who's done this for 10, 20, 30 years, we get people who call us all the time. We have our free tech support, and you can call in or email us and ask us, and we are happy to help. Most of the time, it's just a matter of maybe one of us has had some experience that you haven't, as someone calling in. And so it really helps, to kind of bounce something off of us, so we can say, actually, this one works for this reason and this one works for that reason. And, there you go. So sometimes it's a really quick and easy answer, but otherwise, sometimes it's a little more complex and someone might need to do some experimentation. You heard me talk a lot about the silicone rubbers. We also have, this is a urethane mold rubber. This is another type of rubber. It's similar in the sense that it is a flexible material, but a lot of times people will choose one material over another for a couple different reasons. This particular material is great for things like maybe abrasiveness, like concrete casting or plaster casting, which isn't that abrasive, but people like urethanes for that. Silicones could be used for virtually anything, but the urethanes are also used for not just molds, but castings as well. Same with the silicones. So even though, these are popular mold materials, it's really cool to see them used as casting materials. And to give you just a little bit of an example, this is actually a silicone prosthetic. And so this isn't a mold, it was made from a mold, but this prosthetic can be applied to the skin using some of our materials. And it's just like some terrible thing happened to me on the way to work. And basically this is made out of silicone, and it's kind of like the same material that you could use to make a mold, except that we instead used it for making what we would call the prosthetic casting, things like that. So that's something that you can actually consider too. And so when we talk about the flexible mold materials, we don't want to forget the rigid mold materials. So the rigid mold materials are things like this. So this is actually a hard plastic. It's one of our urethane plastics. And that piece that I just showed you, the scar or, whatever horrible thing happened, was actually in here. And so one reason that this is popular is when you make silicone to silicone molds. It can be done as long as they're compatible with each other, but also they like to stick to each other. So you would have to apply a specific release agent, like Ease Release 200. However, when you use a plastic mold like this, you don't need the release agent. So it's very popular in the special effects industry, or even like local haunts, to use something like this, because you can quickly and easily apply the silicone with no release, pop it out, and then boom, you're good to go. So these are just examples of things that you can make with, with this type of, with our type of materials. So it's pretty versatile. You can do rubbers, resins, urethane, silicones. It runs the gamut. And if it is confusing or you're just not sure, like I said, give us a ring and we'll definitely try to point you in the right direction. So as far as the first demo I'm going to do for you, I know we had talked about making a mold, like how do you actually do that? So I'm going to show you how to make a really simple pour-on mold, which a lot of the techniques and things like that can be applied to all of mold making. Just like when you're cooking, if you know how to saute, you know how to chop, you can take those techniques and become, 4-star Michelin, that kind of thing. Same with our materials. All of our materials are the same thing that you can buy at home and you use for your projects, or someone in the movie industry winning an Oscar. They can all use the same type of materials. There's not like a special grade. It's all about how you use them and getting experience and practice and guidance and things like that. So I'm going to show you quickly how to make a really simple mold. I'll demold it for you so you can see it. I'm going to move some of this a little bit out of the way just to give us a little bit of room. And basically we'll get started on that. And if there are questions along the way about, how do I make this? How do I do that? Feel free to ask them. I will try to get to, all of the questions if possible. It might just take a little bit longer if I'm in the middle of talking about something, but I'll definitely try to make sure that I get everybody's questions answered. And if not, we can follow up afterwards. But very quickly, I have this little section of things here. So what is all this? How do you make a mold? Like, how do I even get started? I don't even know what to do. Like, here's what you can do. So let's say I wanted to make a mold. Oh, let's pick something cute, like this little guy right here. Let's say, you love this little piece and you want to make more of them. Okay. So we call this a baseboard or a base. This is just some cut MDF. You could use something like this, which is some foam core. I've used cardboard in a pinch. I've also used popcorn buckets, which I'll show you later. So what you need is your original model, whether you sculpted it, whether you bought it, found it, whatever, and you're going to use something to adhere it to the base. So usually like hot glue, something simple. I'm going to put it right here. Pretend, boom, 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 it's hot glued down. And then I have to create mold walls, because if I just dump mold rubber on it, clearly it's just going to be like a mess. So basically, to make the mold wall, something simple is I have a deli cup that I cut the top off of. So this guy's hot glued down. I would place something like this over it and I hot glue the sides. I've created walls or barriers to contain my mold rubber. So now I can mix and pour and I'm good to go. Another option, if it doesn't fit something like this, is making mold walls. So it could be any shape, honestly, but something simple would be, like this is kind of small. So I usually would have a 1/2 inch on all sides and I would create my mold walls all around it, my containment walls, and then I'd mix and pour that way. So, hopefully that makes sense as far as like, how do you even get started in making a mold? This is probably the quickest and easiest way to get started with that type of thing. And, most people, to me, like when I first started making molds, I kind of was like, what is all this? Once I started doing it, I got really excited and I kept looking at things in a different way. And I really just was like, what can I make a mold of? So it's like something that once you get started, I think you'll hopefully have an interest in continuing in and making more molds and castings of things. So what did I just do? Put my gloves on. So one of the most important things when you're working with our materials, they're chemicals. It's all fun and games, right? But really these are chemicals and you want to treat them with respect. So what you'll want to do is you'll have safety gear on. I have an apron. I've got my gloves. These are vinyl gloves. We do not recommend using things like latex. Vinyl is really good. The other thing that you can use are safety glasses. I happen to have these glasses on. We do recommend safety glasses because depending on what you're doing, things can splash. If you wanted, you could wear long sleeves, protect your area. You see I have my little paper here. It's all important. So That's something that we always recommend. So what I'm going to show you is how to make a mold, and I have this pre-made a little bit here. So what I had discussed about how do you make your mold barrier, your mold walls and containment field. This is literally a popcorn bucket. Cut it down short, hot glued this beautiful little medallion down, and I left about a 1/2 inch on all sides. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix and I'm going to pour my material on top. So I didn't even have to like make walls. This kind of became my wall, which is nice. So the material that I'm going to use is called Moldstar 15. So Moldstar 15 is one of our Platinum Cure silicones. And there's usually a question about, well, what's a Platinum Cure silicone? And why am I going to use it? So Smooth-On makes Platinum Cure silicone and Tin Cure silicone. What those are referencing are the catalyzing agents, or what makes it cure. These don't dry, they actually cure. That's how they set up. So when you put your Platinum Cure silicone, the platinum is the catalyzing agent, or what makes it cure. The tin is generally going to be the curing agent for the other type of material. There are differences between them. One, just right off the bat, is cost. Tin costs less than platinum. So the platinum does cost slightly more, but there are some reasons why you might choose one over the other. If you use a Tin Cure silicone, for instance, they're all wonderful as far as picking up detail. You will get excellent detail, almost down pretty much to like a fingerprint. You'll get wonderful detail. However, the Tin Cure versus the Platinum Cure. Platinum Cure is what we could call archival. If I want to make a mold and come back to it in many, many years, even a couple decades, as long as there is still life in that mold, I could probably come back to that and it's good to go with the Platinum Cure. If I use the Tin Cure, it still lasts for a decent amount of time, like maybe 5 years or so. But if I really want to come back to something, pretend I have an architectural element that I'm reproducing from my home. 30 years, I pay it off, I move out, whoops, I banged into it. Now I could actually make a mold of something and reproduce it because I've kept this mold in my mold library for that long. The other thing is, what if your original model breaks? You have this mold, that you can actually use to reproduce new ones. As far as the Tin Cure versus the Platinum Cure, another reason is Tin Cures have a little less sensitivity when it comes to contaminants. One of the things in selecting the mold rubber is it going to cure against the surface of what I'm pouring it onto? So if this was a sculpture that I made and it was actually made of sulfur clay, sulfur is probably the biggest enemy of Platinum Cure and Tin Cure, but mostly Platinum Cure silicones, because they are so sensitive and they will not cure. They actually will have like a tacky surface. Sometimes it's a total lack of cure. Sometimes it's not. And that can be heartbreaking if it's an original model that's precious. Lots of tears, but otherwise, the best thing to do would be maybe if you wanted to try the Tin Cure. That kind of brings us to sealers and release agents also. So if you seal the model with something like an acrylic, a clear acrylic, then you could probably get away with, you're creating a barrier. You can actually probably get away with using a Tin Cure if this was made of sulfur. There are other contaminants, latex. It's another reason why we don't recommend latex gloves. Urethane rubber causes contamination. It could be newly cured epoxies or things. There's so many different contaminants. You just have to do a small scale test to make sure, but that could be another reason why you choose one over the other. In making this is actually a hard piece of plastic. So when I'm using, this is my original model, if this had porosity, think of porosity like a piece of wood, a piece of stone or concrete. Those pores, when you pour this silicone rubber into it, this stuff can go through a pinhole. So if there's any type of porosity, it's going to go in there, mechanically lock, and then basically stick to it, and you're not going to get it off. So any porosity, you're going to seal it, usually no matter what material you're going to use, because you just don't want it to stick. And then in using a silicone, for majority of situations, it's optional to use a release agent like Ease Release 200 on your original. With this, I hear it's a hard piece of non-porous plastic. I put a little release agent on it just for, good luck. But, other than that, I'm good to go and I'm ready to pour. So like I said, the material that I'm going to use is called Moldstar 15. So the Moldstar 15 is the Platinum Cure silicone of my choice. It's actually one of my favorite mold making materials. If you're using it, It's really, really simple to use. It's 1 part A to 1 part B by volume. These are equal volume. So all I have to do by volume is measure the same amount, and then I can mix them together. When you're looking at the different materials and you're trying to pick, some are mixed by volume, some are mixed by weight. So for me, I like by volume, and a lot of people prefer that. I find it much easier to do. The by weight, you need an accurate digital gram scale. Some people don't want to spend the money on that, or they just don't want to do it because they feel like uncertain about it. So for me, I love the convenience of this. So I'm going to use this to mix, and then I'll kind of show you how I'm going to mix and pour everything together. Put this here so you can see a little better. This is just a deli cup. It's a plastic cup. One of the things that is important is clean cups. People try to use a lot of different cups with varied success, but we always want to use things that are clean. So, so you don't have like, maybe this was like something that I ate yogurt out of, you know, what if you left some yogurt in, who knows? It could cause the materials to not set up correctly. So clean deli cup. I also have stir sticks. So this is, if you'll notice, a flat bottom stick. This is really important. Most of the time, you can get away with like a popsicle stick or something like this, and it works just fine. You'll see sometimes people will be like, I have this plastic fork, you know, from dinner last night. I'm just going to use this. I've actually tried it, and mine failed. And we don't recommend that because you can't get a really good and thorough mix. So when you see this go in there, you'll see it and it can touch the bottom. And so I can scrape everything with the flat bottom stick, which is really important for success. You know, we want you to have success for a number of reasons other than just, you know, we want you to be happy, but it's your time and your money that's precious. And so it's really important that, you know, you get this right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put each of these in there, and I'm going to stir it and show you how it's done. These two materials, like I said, it's 1 part A to 1 part B by volume. And what's really unique about the Mold Star series is it's basically a very low mixed viscosity. So think of viscosity like how thick is it? You know, if I dump some water is very low mixed viscosity, or, you know, it's just boom, some water. It's so loose. It's really thin and easy to stir. Now, what if I'm trying to stir something like molasses? That's a higher mixed viscosity. So these are lower mixed viscosities, which makes them really popular because if you have a higher mixed viscosity, it doesn't mean that you get less detail or anything. You know, there's not really a super negative to it. It's just more along the lines of like, well, now that I have a higher mixed viscosity, it's more work to stir it, and then you can get air bubbles in it. And so when I pour this, and I pour it in, you might see some bubbles come up, and it's what we call de-airing. So from just the act of mixing, you're going to get bubbles. And so I'll just start, and I'm going to put my part B in first. That's what I like to do. I try to start with part B. So you'll notice I'm scraping as much as I can out. I don't want to try to alter the mix ratio much. It's important for me to try to keep it all as much as I can, keep 1 to 1 by volume. And so I'm going to try to scrape out as much as I can. That's another reason why the flat bottom sticks really help. You know, imagine me trying to scoop this out with like a fork. It would be crazy. So I'm going to try to get out as much as I can. And that's my part B. So that's there. I'm going to just throw that away. Then I'm going to mix my part A in. So best practices, when you receive the material, you'll have your A and your B. It will be something along these lines. So you'll have your A and your B containers of whatever it may be. And you'll notice on the top of them, it's going to say stir or shake well, depending on the product. So take it to heart. That's really important because we call that pre-mixing. So I've actually, before we met today, I pre-mixed everything and dispensed them. So the pre-mixing, think of it like salad dressing. You ever see them where they separate out? It's pretty dramatic when you see them separate out. This can happen to some of our chemicals as well. And so you want to reconstitute or kind of stir them up, or pre-mix them so that they are all homogeneous when you pour them. Imagine if you don't have enough chemical and you kind of dump off just the top because you didn't pre-mix, it may not cure properly or at all. So, that's something important. Another thing, I don't know what the temperature is, by where you are, but for me, 73 Fahrenheit is the lay of the land here. We basically want you to mix and store everything at 73 Fahrenheit. I'm going to mix this in as we talk. So basically 73 Fahrenheit, low relative humidity or atmospheric humidity, 50% or lower is always great. and that'll help our material set up a little bit better for you. If you start going hotter or colder, you might notice the materials don't set up the way you want them to, or at all. So it's always critical to look at that also, because when you read our product technical bulletins, one of the things you'll see on there are things like pot life, cure time, etc. All that is based on 73 Fahrenheit. So if it changes, it's kind of like, who knows what'll happen. We just know that basically if you go a little warmer, it might set up a little more quickly than you expect. And if it goes colder, it may set up slowly or not at all. So here you see the two materials. Why did we make this mint green? First of all, it's a cute color, but it does help with identifying, did I mix this properly? It's a positive mix indicator. So if you'll notice, I have a good grip on this because it's something that I want to stir thoroughly. I'm mixing on all sides, and you can kind of see the white and the green coming together. If I see color streaks, that's not good. You don't want color streaks. You want a homogeneous mix. You want it to look even. And so with this material, we have a pot life and a cure time. Pot life is when the A and the B get together. How much time do I have before it goes from liquid to a solid rubber? The cure time is how long does it take for it to actually cure to where it's usable and I can demold it. So as I'm mixing, one of the most important things other than pre-mixing is scraping the sides and the bottom. So here I am, I'm going to scrape the sides and I'm going to scrape the bottoms. And that's why I love the flat stick. I scrape the sides, I scrape the bottom. Even on this, you can still see there's color streaks. So I'm going to mix, because with this material, I have about 50 minutes to mix for my pot life, which is great. I have a lot of time that I can mix this. So I could talk for a whole hour if I wanted to almost. But here I go again, several times. I'm scraping the sides, I'm scraping the bottoms. This is a technique that you can carry with you through all of your mold making and casting adventures. So just make sure when you're doing it, you do it thoroughly. So I'm mixing the sides and the bottoms till I can see that I've done a good job. Once you feel like you've done a good job, you want to do what we call the double mix and pour. That's why I have 2 cups. So I got this guy. I did my 1 pour, I'm gonna do my 2nd pour. So what I'm doing is I'm transferring what I thought was awesome into this guy here. So I'm gonna do the exact same thing over again. This is where you're gonna catch some errors where, oops, I thought I got everything, but you might see that there was some unmixed materials or things like that. Or maybe you kind of only mixed in the middle and didn't scrape the sides. This is almost an insurance policy that helps you make sure that you've got a very thorough mix. And when we talk about the pot life and we talk about 50 minutes, there are other products, that actually might be a lot less pot life. So, doing this mix and pour, if I have like a 30-second pot life, there's no time that I'm going to have to do this type of thing. So that's something that I would keep in mind as I'm mixing, is like, what is my timing on everything? That's really important and critical. So here I am again. I'm going to do another awesome mix. So I'm again stirring thoroughly, scraping the sides and the bottoms. I just want to make sure that everything is thoroughly mixed together. And as I'm mixing, like we were talking about the bubbles, I can see bubbles inside of here as I'm mixing. That's natural. I mean, you are doing a stirring motion. So as that's happening, I can see that happening. But because this is a lower viscosity, it's a material that's less thick than some of the other materials that we have, this makes it easy, because people will sometimes have to buy extra tools if something is really, really thick, like a vacuum chamber or things like that. And with this, you do not need that. So I'm going to get ready to pour now. So I feel like I've done a good job here. And I'm going to clean off my stick, throw it away. And to me, I can kind of look at it and go, okay, I might see a few bubbles, but I don't see any streaks. Because if I saw color streaks, like blatantly color streaks, that would be something that I would question and continue to mix to make sure it was thorough. So now what I'm going to do is pour into this. When you pour into this, you want to pour the white part, the lowest part of your mold. This is the best way to do it. And you want to pour it slowly in a long, thin stream. And so I'm going to, and usually to get the long, thin stream, you kind of lift up a little. So here I am doing my little pour. I'm starting slowly. As I'm doing this, you may see bubbles come off of the lip of the cup. And that lip of that cup, that's hoping to pop as many bubbles as possible. But also because this is a low viscosity material, most of these bubbles are going to go away and not be on the surface of your original model, which is really nice. So I'm just going to sit here, do my pour, and hopefully you can see that it's coming out very slow. I'm not trying to rush. I'm trying to go slowly on purpose, just to make sure that I have everything, as far as when I pour it. I don't want to start moving around. It's not like making brownies. I'm just dumping it in a pan. That's definitely not what I want to do. I want to make sure that when I do this, this is slow, methodical, and things like that. So here.
Someone was asking, what approximate area will that cover?
The question is, what is the approximate area that will cover? It actually depends. Each material is slightly different. The best thing to do is we have a free tool on our website, and it's a materials calculator. So you select the material that you want on smoothon.com, and you'll go smoothon.com. On the top right, we have a keyword search. On the keyword search, you can type in calculator. You can also find it on our homepage, but you type in you select the material, you type in the original model and the box's size, and it will actually give you an idea, an estimate of how much material you will need. So that will definitely help you figure out how much that you might need. So in pouring this, what I would normally do is put this aside, and now I have about like 4 hours to wait till this sets up. So we don't have 4 hours to wait unless you want to grab some coffee or something, but we're going to set that aside. And what I want to do is I want to show you the demold. So I made one ahead of time. And so that you can see, here's my pour, and this is the one that I'm going to demold. So as I demold it, I just rip open this. If you have a different type of mold wall, you just want to remove it. And when I remove this, I'll show it to you this way, you can get an idea. If I can get it off. Come on, buddy. You can see here, here's my heraldic demold. So there's your original model, and there is the copy of it. So later, maybe tomorrow, I'll demold that and I'll have the exact same thing. So this MoldStar 15 is awesome. When we talk about different mold stars, because we do have several different ones, there might be reasons why you select one versus the other. If you decide to use the MoldStar series, which to me, this is a very versatile mold rubber, Platinum Cure mold rubber, you can figure out, what does the 15 mean? So the 15 refers to the shore hardness or the durometer. So if you look at maybe, say, a 20A, so this is MoldStar 15, which is a 15A. 20A might feel kind of like a rubber band. So for comparison, a 40 or a 40A might feel a little bit like maybe like a pencil eraser. So just to give someone an idea of what that might feel like. So in the MoldStar series, this is the 15, we actually have a 16, a 19, a 20, a 30, and a 31. And you might use one versus the other based on your timing. So we talked about the 15 because this one has a 50-minute pot life. It has like a 4-hour cure. So when I use this material, I have a lot of time. You saw me, I was not rushing or going crazy. I had time. If I have a larger piece or I just don't care, I can mix and pour that at ease. A larger piece, if I had something with a very fast pot life, I may not have time to adequately mix and pour. This is actually the MoldStar 20T, and the T means translucent. So it's kind of translucent. You can kind of see shadows through it. I don't know if in the camera if you can see it, but the translucent is really nice because, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes these are used for molds and sometimes they're used for castings. So maybe I want to make a gasket, for something that broke, or I just want to make something for myself, like maybe a silicone piece of jewelry. This is really nice for adding color. If I want to add color to this, our Silk Pig colorants would be wonderful to add to this. Because it's this translucent white color, it will take the color really nice. If I was adding it to my MoldStar, I'm fighting this mint green color, so it might be challenging to get the exact color that I had desired. And this, this is going to make it easier for you. So the T series that we offer in the MoldStar are great for that. The T series usually are very quick as well. For instance, if I use, something in the T series, I could probably have a mold as quick as 12 minutes if I wanted to, depending on which one I used. The other thing is with the MoldStar 30, that's what this blue one was. So this blue guy right here, this is the MoldStar 30. So we went from 15, 19 to 30. 15 is going to be softer than the 30. And so this one is a little more firm. It has less flexibility. It's still flexible, but because it's firmer, it actually flexes just a little bit less. It may have a little less elasticity. So in trying to determine why would I use one over the other, if I need a little more elasticity, maybe my piece is a little bit weird and I might have to stretch it a little more to pop it out. Maybe I want something softer, like the Molestar 15 or something else, to where I have a little more elasticity to remove it. Something firm like that, like the Molestar 30, is really great because if I'm doing something like the person asked earlier, a coin, there's really no draft on a coin, nothing for it to get caught on. I just pop that right out, boom, good to go. So, deciding how you're going to do something, if you can't figure it out or you just want to double check, give us a call and we can double check for you based on, what you tell us for your application to see which one might work better. The other thing, as far as like making molds and all that type of stuff, is the casting part. Once you make the mold, I call that the easy part. The casting part's also pretty easy, but the casting part sometimes is challenging because like when you have a mold, you have so many options. So deciding, what do you want to make is sometimes daunting because you're like, sometimes people will call and I'm like, what do you want to make? And they're like, I don't know. What do you think? And it's like, wow, because there's so many cool options that you can do. Everything from colors to fillers to metallic effects, like I'm going to show you. So let me talk a little bit about some of the casting resins because I'm going to go into doing some casting demos for you. But I want to talk about 3 main resins that I'm going to use and show you a little bit of an example of each of them, just so that you can kind of see the difference between them. And these are very, very commonly used materials that someone might use for making a casting. You could, like I showed earlier, you could use a resin also to make a mold, but I would say more commonly I see it as castings. So I want to show you the ones that I pulled out on the table. So this guy here, I like to call him Burger King, but this is an opaque white. This is the Smoothcast 300 series. So it's an opaque white, hard, rigid plastic. So we have a multitude of different products and product lines, but like I said, these are the most common that I see people use. So that's why I'm going to focus on these. So with this white opaque material, it's going to set up maybe in about 3 minutes with the Smoothcast 300. And depending on the mass, it'll cure in about maybe like 10 minutes. But when I talk about mass, if you look at the Burger King guy, look down here where it's really thin over here. So this part here is what I would call a lower mass versus thick part, which is a higher mass. So a thick area would have a higher mass versus a thin area. Thin areas sometimes take a little longer to set up. When you mix the materials together, just like the silicones, you're going to have your A and your B. They're going to come together in the right proportion, how you measured it and mixed it, and it's going to set up. However, if you have a low mass, the low mass will take longer because when these materials come together, there's heat given off. We call it an exotherm. So that exotherm is required to make this set up. So that's one reason why if I applied heat to my resin, or I worked in pretend I'm outside and it's like 100 degrees, that heat is going to make this set up more quickly because the exotherm is what makes it cure. But if I have a low mass, there's not much stuff there to make the heat happen. So it actually takes longer to set up. So that's one of the most basic materials that we offer. When someone's really unsure what they want, I usually try to steer them towards this because it's very versatile. There are several in this series as well that go ultra fast, medium, slow, fast, that kind of thing in the series as far as pot life and cure time. There's another popular series, very similar. It's called the Smoothcast 320 series. So if you can see the difference, I'm going to put them near each other. This guy up here, this little like bone thing, is actually off-white. So it's an off-white color, like a tiny bit light brown, very, very off-white. So the white one, opaque white, this is a rigid off-white. This is the Smoothcast 320 series. Imagine I'm a taxidermist and I'm trying to replicate an antler or bone. It's really nice because straight out of the bat, this gives you an off-white natural look. Another reason people like to use the 320, it's opaque, is maybe I want to add some color to this, something like our So Strong color tints, something like our UVO, UV resistant colorants, or even maybe our Ignites fluorescents. If you're going to use this, it's much easier to add color to this because it's off-white than fight this this super bright white. If I add pink and red, and if I add red and white, I'm going to get some type of pink. I'll get a better close match to what I'm looking for if I use this right here. The 320 series, same idea, about 3 minutes for the 320 for the pot life and about 10 minutes for it to set up based on mass. Another thing is this also has a 320, 321, 322, which is kind of like slow, medium, fast pot life and cure time. Now, one of my favorite series is the 325 series. This is nicknamed the Color Match series. So with the Color Match series, this is probably your best way of getting accurate color representation. And so this one is actually a clear amber color. So I want to hold this up, and if you can see my hand behind it, here's this clear amber. So we call it clear amber. Some people are like, I don't see the amber. I mean, the thicker you go, the more you see the amber. But in reality, this is pretty clear, actually. So this particular material, when I add color to it, if I use the smooth, the So Strong color tints, like I mentioned, color tint, I'm tinting it. If I add a tiny bit, that's actually, we say don't go more than 3% of the total system weight for our colorants. But if I add just a tiny bit, maybe even 0.1%, they're concentrated colorants, it'll actually be able to still be clearish and see-through while adding a color tint. It would look something along the lines, maybe, depending on how much you added, maybe something like this. And so if you can see these two, they're clear. And I want to put my hand behind this one as well. Again, a clear, ooh, that's pretty cool, a clear color tint. You can also, what's unique about this Smoothcast 325 series is that even though it's a rigid material when it's fully cured, there's a really unique property to it where it stays a little semi-rigid, just a little bit longer after it cures. You have about 2.5 minutes to work with this, and maybe about a 10-minute cure depending on mass. But if you have a thin section, or maybe you want to do some kind of really cool effect to it, this stays semi-rigid. So what that means is, like, if I have a thin section, like this nose is like crazy thin. So if I demold too early, the nose might be a little soft, but it's actually, you can use that to your advantage in some instances. For instance, this guy right here, if you can see this, this is actually a very thin, about a 1/16 of an inch, Smoothcast 325 with a little bit of panache to it. And it was twisted while it was still in that semi-rigid state in order to get something like this, which is pretty cool, pretty fragile, but pretty cool, depending on what you're doing with it. But so someone might, for instance, maybe I want to make a telephone post sign and it curves a little bit. Well, I can maybe demold it slightly early, put it up on the sign to get that curve and let it hold until it fully cures. So that's one of the unique features of the 325 series. So of those materials, I'm going to use each one of them and show you how to do some casting effects using our Cast Magic system. And so the Cast Magic system sounds really fancy, but it's basically using some specialty powders that we use with our resins. You can also use them with rubbers. You can use them with, with different types of colorants as well. But what will happen is what you'll do is you'll get different types of casting effects. And those casting effects can either be on the surface or it can be throughout the entire piece. And I'm going to show you some options as far as what you can do. So let me get started first with just showing you the mold I'm going to use. So this particular mold, let's put this over here. This particular mold is our MoldStar 16. It is a silicone mold, and it's actually a silver bar. Like if you were to purchase from like the Mint, like silver bar, this is actually a silver bar. And so with the Cast Magic system, you have options in order to get metallic or pearlescent or glitter type effects. So when I use the silicone mold, it's really nice because it has really good release properties. I put something in there, it usually peels right out really nicely. So what I'm going to use is the Cast Magic system, which this is our silver bullet. So silver bullet kind of looks like a silver metallic. It's not real metal. They're like mica powders. And so when I use this particular material, I can either brush it onto the surface, I can mix it in, I can decide, do I use a clear and opaque, blah, blah, blah. There's so many options for you. And when you go on our website, there's actually a page that shows you a myriad of options, and it's really just the beginning. You can come up with really cool stuff. In this case, I want to pretend like I'm making an actual silver bar. because I can't buy one. So, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this material. I'm going to use a disposable chip brush, and I'm going to use the Smoothcast 300 series, which was the white material, the white opaque material that I had showed you. So you use barely any of this. This little jar might seem tiny, and it is kind of tiny, but there's so much powder in here compared to what you actually need to coat the surface. So let me go ahead and get into that right now just to show you. So it's just mica powders. You're going to put a little bit in there. I don't want to go too crazy. And I'm using my chip brush. I'm going to put a little in there and spread it around. As I'm spreading it around, just going slowly. If you see any areas as you're brushing this on that look like they're like bald spots or stuff like that, that's a good indication that you didn't put enough on. If you leave it all clumpy, like how I have it here, not great either, because the resin, when you pour it in there, it can't cure properly. It's going to look terrible. So I'm basically making sure I coat everything here. So I'm brushing the sides. I'm brushing everything all the way to the top. One of the telltale signs of doing it where it looks fake, if you're trying to replicate something real, is when you miss the lip of it and you can kind of see where you didn't put the casting powder, and then it just looks kind of weird. So what I'm doing is I'm just looking, I'm making sure that I coat all of this area. And if I wanted to try to mix this powder inside of the Smoothcast 300 instead of putting it on the surface, it's opaque. You're really not going to see it. So there's no point in trying to do that. I will show you later a technique to mix it in that can give you some neat results. But pretty much here I'm done. It took like a few seconds. Now there's excess in there. You don't need the excess. So I'm going to tap that out on the side gently. When I tap out the excess, I just want to make sure, because now that it's cleared out, I'm going to make sure that I can actually see that I got everywhere. I see I missed a little over here and a little over here. Let's try to get all of it. And then I'm just looking on all sides. Okay, it looks like I got it all. So I got this guy here. I don't need this anymore. I'm going to throw that away and close my powder. And I'm also going to add a little bit of black. So this is our So Strong color tints. I'm going to add a little black to it, just to add, just to add a tiny bit of color to it. Make it a tiny bit gray. I could do just white, but I'm just going to try to jazz it up a little. So depending on how much of the colorant you add, you can add a little, you can add a lot. You're going to get a different effect, which is really neat. And depending on whether you use the 320, which is opaque white, the 320, which is off-white, the 325, which is the clear amber, you can get a myriad of different effects, which is really, like I said, fun to do. It could be used for replicating something like this silver bar. Maybe I'm doing a theater production where someone's making off from something at the bank, and I'm not going to actually put silver bars, and plus the actors can't be carrying stuff that heavy. So this makes sense to make something that's just, that's not expensive, that they can use and remake again if something breaks. Or it could just be something cool. Maybe I'm playing a gag, or maybe it's jewelry, and you want to make a very unique effect. So let me show you here what I'm going to do. And this is basically my mixing container again, and the Smoothcast 300 A and B. These are mixed equal parts by volume. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my colorant to the part B. When I add my colorant to the part B, I'm just going to put a little bit in there, make it a little bit gray, because the opaque white plus black will make a little bit of a gray color. And then what I'm going to wind up doing is I like to pre-mix that first, and we actually recommend that. So once I dump it in here, I'm going to scrape it all out just like we did with the silicone. Get everything as much as I can in there because we want to keep that equal mix ratio. Throw that away. I'm going to pre-mix this first. So one of the reasons that I want to pre-mix it first is if I put A and B together, my pot life starts, and there's only about maybe 3 minutes pot life dependent on the mass. And so that's minimizing the amount of time that I have in order to make this. So I want to give myself more time. I'm scraping the sides and the bottom just to make sure all the black is in there. Now that that's ready, it makes it much more easy for me to then put the A in there. So when I put this in, my time starts about 3 minutes, and I'm going to pour into this mold. A little trick that I like to use is this popsicle stick. So what this popsicle stick does is when I pour the material onto it, it softens the blow. It's not like I'm pouring aggressively, but when it hits that powder, you know, it tends to want to spread. And so when I pour it on this stick, it'll help soften it and make the appearance look nicer and more smooth. Otherwise, you might come back after you demold and you're like, oh no, bald spot. So I'm getting my A in there. Even though it's 3 minutes and it feels like it's fast, it's actually more time than you think. And you still want to be thorough. It's not quite enough time that I would do a double mix. So I have to make sure that I really do it right. We talked a little bit also about the exotherm, which is the heat that's generated in order to make this cure. So not only do you have to premix and measure correctly and stir properly, but you want to make sure that you can feel that exotherm. So I'm mixing it, I'm scraping the sides. I can put my hand on the side of the container, and when I feel a little bit of warmth, I know it's starting to happen. And 3 minutes, like I said, is not that long. If you feel nervous, like, oh my gosh, I can't fathom how quick that's going to happen. Sometimes I'll put like my little phone down and I'll have my little timer going, and no shame in that. Definitely, it's a good thing. So I'm scraping the sides, got the bottoms, and now I'm going to pour. So here's my little stir stick. I'm going to pour directly on it as much as I can, and I'm going to let it soften that blow. I'm going to just let it pour out, fill this mold, keep on going. And we should be good. So now, in maybe 10 minutes or so, that would be ready for demolding. And so what we did was, after we brushed everything onto the surface and after we poured the material behind it, that powder that we applied into the mold is actually going to stick or bond right onto the surface that we poured this liquid resin in. And when it demolds, you're going to be able to see what the outcome is. I'm going to move this over just to give us a little room. Over here. Just to move it out of the way. I'm just going to push this over here. I have a little room. And what you'll see when it's demolded is actually this guy right here. So this is actually the silver bar with the silver bullet. And I talked to you a little bit about why did I add the black. The black will actually phase when it turns, and it'll actually be a gray color on the back. So this is kind of the outcome here. There is some detail on here that you can see. It says fine silver and that kind of thing. If I wanted to now post finish it, I could actually go back and maybe put a little wash of enamel, scrape it off so it goes into the recesses if I wanted to, anything actually. This is actually a hard piece of plastic right now. And basically now, that's, it's whatever I want to do at this point. The cool thing about having that mold is that I can now reuse it if I want to and make a completely different casting into it, because I have that reusable mold rubber. So you can usually go over and over again and make a whole bunch of cool things. So that's that guy. If you wanted to try to mix something into it, because it's an opaque resin, you probably wouldn't be able to see it because the opacity would block you really seeing it, and you wouldn't really get the same effect as putting it on the very outside where you'd see it. The next one that I want to show you is another resin. It's the 320 that we had talked about. And the 320 is actually a really cool material, but the 320 is the off-white one. So with this particular one, I'm using another really popular Cast Magic, and slide this guy over. And that is actually the Bronzanker. And the Bronzanker kind of looks like bronze metallic. So that was a silver metallic. I've often used the silver bullet for making like blades on fake knives or things like that, or swords. The Bronzanker is great for making faux bronze pieces. It could be a headdress, it could be, a sculptural piece, etc. So this, again, very affordable. You don't use much, and I'm going to show you how to do it with this guy. So that was Molsar 16. This is Molsar 15, which is what I demoed earlier. This is my little medallion. I just thought this looked cool because it had some detail on it. And so I wanted to show you what the 320 looked like. I will put a little bit of black in that as well. And I personally think when you use black behind the Bronzanker, I think it makes it pop a little bit more. Some people don't want to do that. You could try to do purple. You can come up with any color combination that you really like, but I personally like how the black looks, and it should look good with the 320 because it'll take that color really well. So what I'm going to do is the same idea. Oops, put a little bit in there, just a little bit of that bronze ochre. It's pretty. I like it. And put this around. And like I said, this mold is green, which is nice because once I cover it with this, I can see where I may have missed a spot or not. So I'm just kind of dusting the entire surface. I'm going to move it around gently. Once the entire surface is coated, like I said, I'm going to go in and double check that I didn't miss anything. And then we'll do our pour. I like to do the same thing where I use that little stick to kind of like cushion the pour, so it doesn't like make it splash or anything. But other than that, the technique is similar. And you can, I mean, honestly, if I wanted to try to mix multiple cast magics, I could do something like that as well. But depending on what you're doing, the result could be kind of weird, you know, or it could be really, really cool and unique. You never know. So I'm going through here, making sure that I got all areas because I see I missed an area. Now that there's extra that I want to dump out, I'm going to do that. Throw in my little disposable chip brush, dump out my extra, and I'm good to go. So you can see the surface is coated of this silicone mold. I didn't have to put any release agent, nothing. So it's already kind of pretty as is, but we're going to jazz it up even more. And so I'm using the 320, which is that off-white. And so this is it here. I'm going to add a little bit of black. Like I said, I like to add it to my part B. So again, I'm using the So Strong. These are concentrated. A little goes a really long way. So depending on what you're doing, you can decide how much you want to add, a little or a lot. If you're trying to keep track, like for instance, like maybe you want to do it again. Pardon me. You want to do multiple of the same one. Well, what you could do is do by drops, or you could measure it by weight. By drops is usually a little bit easier. So I'm going to put my part B in, and the part B has the black. So I'm going to pre-mix that into this. And again, before I open this, I pre-mix everything before I dispensed it from the container. And I get all that in there, trying to keep that same 1-to-1 mix ratio. This 320 will also set up in about 10 minutes, but I have about a 3-minute pot life. So here I am mixing this up. Make sure my black is thoroughly incorporated. And then I'm going to add my part A. So mixy mix. Once this hits, I basically have 3 minutes to mix and pour. So get this guy in here, scrape it all in there, throw this out, and here we go. So I'm scraping the sides, I'm scraping the bottoms. Here we are here. And again, I could keep my hand on the side to feel the exotherm or the heat. Scrape the sides, scrape the bottoms, just a little bit here. I'm going to use that same stick technique that I had mentioned a couple times, just to cushion it. And I'm going to go for it. Feels like it's getting there. Yeah, I can feel this. And you can see this is a low mixed viscosity, very loose, very easy to mix. It's not exactly water, but it's pretty close. So here we are. I'm going to pour that over. I'm going to pour slowly. I try to find, like I said, the lowest point. And I'm going to pour this right on top of that to cushion it. Because this material, like most of these resins, are what we call the low mixed viscosity, not only does it make it a little bit easier for pouring, but honestly, it does make it easier because of bubbles. It's possible to get bubbles and stuff from the mixing, not just in the mold rubber, but also in the casting resins. And so if I had a very thick material, I might notice that it's like harder to pour because it's thicker, and the bubbles, they're trying to fight their way up. If it's thicker, it's harder for them to do that. So with this particular material, just like all the other resins that I discussed, they're low mixed viscosity. Those bubbles usually rise out, and you don't have to do anything special, like use a pressure chamber or a vacuum chamber or anything like that. And so the vacuum chamber would remove bubbles, the pressure chamber would collapse the bubbles. And so that's an extra expense that you'd have to incur. But with this material, it's really not necessary unless you want it. So once this sets up, and I'm going to move this a little bit out of the way as well. Once this sets up, you're going to have basically, like I said, the bronze ochre look. So it's going to be a bronze look, and I actually have that for you already. So this guy right here is the bronze Anchor. So you could see kind of a bronze look to it on the back. That's when I added that black. And like I was saying, this one takes the color a little better. So you see that it's more of a black color on the back compared to the other one. And so the other one, I added black to it, but because it's a white, it's fighting it so much that it's hard to get that nice black. So you can really see a difference there, even though you saw me add black. And so this bronze piece, I could just be happy with what it is and walk away if I wanted to. I could go back and, add something to it to maybe get into these dark areas. If this was a piece of faux jewelry, like some of the faux jewelry, you like those little dark recesses, might do something like that. Or if I'm doing a larger sculpture piece, maybe I'm an artist and I want to sell my pieces and I want a bronze look, but not real bronze. So this is another way that you can get those cool metallic effects. And we have probably over 10 or 12 or more of these Cast Magic powders. There's so many, and we're always trying to come up with new ones. And so this is a really cool effect that you can get using something very affordable like our Cast Magic system. This last technique is a little bit different, and I wanted to save it for the last just to show you. So with this particular technique, you are still using the Cast Magic system. However, you're actually, instead of dusting the surface, we're going to use the Smoothcast 325. And the 325 was the clear amber, but I'm going to actually put a little bit of colorant, and I'm going to mix the powder inside of it. The reason that I'm using the 325 is so you can actually see what's happening, and it looks really cool to me. And you can vary different things on it to get different outcomes. And so I'm going to just move this over here. This is the Moldstar 20. So you can kind of see that I favor Moldstar series. They're so easy to use, and I love them. Really nice and easy. And this is my tower mold. So the other two were ones that I liked, and this is a tower mold, which I also like, and it works really well. So I'm going to have this here. So 325, again, this one is 1 part A to 1 part B by volume. You can see the theme. The theme is ease of use. The theme is low mixed viscosity, and these all set pretty quickly, which is important because maybe you are in production and you want to make a bunch of these, The colorants that I'm using. Here's the So Strong purple that I'm going to use because I think purple's pretty, and you could use any color of those you wanted. And then I'm using Cast Magic Pearly Blue. We also have a pearly green. I have tons of different colors, but I think these two look cool together. I could do this with Silver Bullet and it would also look really cool, but this combination I just wanted to show you. If I use this pearly blue on the surface, you would get a little bit of a different effect, and I'll show you what that looks like afterwards. So I'm going to put these over here. And like I said, I'm not dusting this. Sometimes with a deep mold like this, it can be challenging to dust the surface, which you could do. But, for me, this is something where I wanted to mix it inside. So I've got my mixing cup here. And with this mixing cup, I'm basically going to, again, put in my A and my B, putting my colorant in first to my part B. This is the purple. So I'll put that guy in there. Got my purple. I could combine colors too. Like if I wanted to do purple and I don't know, white, something like that. You could totally do that if you wanted to. I'm just going to use it all natural. Throw that in there. So I got this. I'm going to pour it in. And again, I'm going to pre-mix. So again, scraping the sides, scraping the bottoms. This one sets up slightly more quickly than the other materials. This one's just 2.5 minutes. But like I said, it's longer than you think. It's definitely more time than you think. If you're trying to decide, we get a question sometimes of how much color do I add to get a color? It's really hard. Like if you say, I want to get a dark blue, how much do I add? Well, your version of dark blue in your mind is definitely going to be different than mine. So we don't really have a ton of recipes, but we always say experiment and less is more, because you can always add more color, but it's really challenging to remove it because you can't. You just have to kind of compensate, which can be challenging. And again, it's not something that you want to keep making these big castings and it not working. So just do a small scale test, and that should help you out to get to your answer. I always keep little notes. I'm a note person, so I'll just be like, okay, I did 3 drops of this, 1 drop of this into this much of this material, and that helps me. Remember if I want to do it one more time. Or sometimes, you'll hear somebody, you might have a friend or somebody who's like, hey, I want to make that. How did you do it? So it's really nice to have it there, just like a recipe. So I'm going to do now the Cast Magic Pearly Blue actually inside of it. So I think this is the fun part. So hopefully you can see this. I'm going to dump some in. It's not a specific amount. I'm going visually with what I think looks good. So for me, I'm dumping some of this in. I hope you can see what I'm doing. I'll put a lot so you guys can see it. And looks good. One more for good measure. Okay. So I'll put this on the side over here. So if you can kind of see a little, I'll try to tilt it to the camera. It gives you almost like this oil slick effect, which is really neat. As I mix it in, let's say I start mixing it and I'm looking at it and I see clumps. Telltale sign of, it could be two things. One, you're just not mixing it enough. Don't leave clumps in there. The other thing to consider would be, is there moisture contamination causing them to clump? So something to consider when you're using the urethanes. So all of these materials, the Smoothcast 300, the Smoothcast 320, the 325, all of these materials are urethane resins, and urethane resins, actually urethane rubbers, urethane foams, they are what we call moisture sensitive. And so what that means is if you have a high relative humidity, those are things that are like the enemy. A high humidity or moisture in the air, something as simple as 60% humidity or something, could cause a bubble or a moisture reaction. And so that might show itself as in the form of bubbles in the casting, bubbles on the surface. And you might be like, how did this happen? Like, I thought this was low viscosity, but it has nothing to do with that. It's actually the urethane reacting with the moisture. And so that's something to consider as far as when you're using stuff. Even my mixing containers, where I'm working is the atmospheric humidity. This is a wooden stir stick. I had a wooden, maybe I had a paper cup that I was mixing in or something. All of those things can absorb atmospheric moisture and cause moisture contamination. Another thing to consider would be this dry powder. A dry powder can absorb atmospheric moisture as well. So if you use any of our filler powders, whether it's the Cast Magic or any of the other ones, you want to make sure that they are completely dry. And so, looking at them in your mind, you're like, these are dry, but it's invisible. You can't always tell, and you might see clumps and you have to break up all the clumps, or you might have to put it into an industrial oven, not one that you'll eat out of again, one dedicated for mold making and casting. Then you bake it out at a low heat. You like put it real flat, like very thin, and then maybe 150 Fahrenheit for several hours. And that'll help get rid of that moisture that could be in whatever filler you're using or things like that. Best thing to do is just don't work in a high humidity environment as well. So that's important. And that's one of the considerations when people are using our urethanes. So I don't know if you can see it or not, but I added that pearly blue and it gave a really cool metallic kind of swirl to it. And hopefully you can see the reflection. It looks awesome to me. And hopefully that you can appreciate that as well, because it looks neat. I'm going to try to move it around. So it's almost like that oil slick look, but purple. Pretty cool. So when I mix this in, like at this point right now, the A and B aren't together. If I felt like adding more of the powder or the colorant, this is the point where I can, because the A and the B have not caused that chemical reaction that's going to start curing. Once I pour this in, boom, timer starts. So here we go. So I'm going to dump this guy in. My 2.5 minutes is starting. Again, it's not as fast as you think, but you still keep it in mind. I'm scraping it all out. Here we go. And I'm going to mix them together. Again, I always try to keep my hand on the side just a little bit to feel it, scraping the sides. The other thing to consider too, when you're mixing powders, especially directly in, is what powder am I using? Is it heavy? Does it have a high density? If you're using a material that has a longer pot life, for instance, this one, because it only has a 2.5-minute pot life, I'm not as concerned about the powder maybe separating out. But if you have a material that pretend it has like a 5-hour pot life, which is very long, and you're using a material that's pretty dense that you're putting into it, such as a filler, that filler may separate and sink. And so that's something to consider when you're actually selecting your material choice. That's why we have a lot of options as far as the pot life and cure time. So here I am going to pour in. And it's looking pretty cool with this metallic purpley bluish swirl. Make sure I get it all in there. Okay, that should be good. And now when this sets up, I'm going to show you the casting. You're going to be able to see everything that's in it because I used a clear material. If I had used an opaque material, you really wouldn't be able to see what was in it. And so, you know, could I have dusted the surface of this with the color, or excuse me, with the Cast Magic powder and still used a clear material? Absolutely. And actually, when you do something like that, sometimes you can hold it up to the light and actually like see through it. I have a couple examples that I can show you of something like that where you can kind of see through different options. So the red sparkles are part of our Cast Magic system. And as you hold them up, you can actually see through the 325 on there. There's also different ones where you want to consider what's the surface that I'm casting into, because that can alter your outcome as well. So I'm going to move this to the side and I'm going to show you the actual outcome. And so when that fully cures and you demold the tower, you get this guy. And so this is basically mixed completely inside of it, not on the surface. And you get this beautiful metallic, almost like oil slick look with it, which is really neat. Hopefully you can see with the reflections on what that looks like. And like I said, one of the really unique things about having a silicone rubber mold like that that's reusable is the fact that I can use that same mold and I can actually make multiple different types of castings. So one mold, multiple outcomes. This was the Cast Magic. This was actually some of our Ignite colors that I played with different dark to light. This has actually got our Glowworm glow powder. So this will actually glow in the dark. There's so many options. This is literally just, you know, the tip of the iceberg when it comes to options, but one mold, multiple outcomes. And that's the beauty of the reusable silicone molds. And so the other thing to consider when you're making your castings, as far as like mold surfaces, is what is that surface going to give me? You kind of saw that glossy, shiny look from the purple metallic Cast Magic, but I want to show you, this is also one of our Cast Magic glitters, but this is 325, but it actually has two different surfaces. And if you can see that more closely, notice this one is actually more of a matte finish. So my actual original model was a matte model. So it was not glossy, it was matte. So when I made that mold, it picked up the matte surface. A lot of times people will say, well, I have this piece and how do I make it matte? Because they have a glossy surface and they want it matte, or vice versa. However, it really starts at the beginning, and that's the easiest way to control the surface is what are you actually going to have on that surface? If I were to make half of it glossy and half of it matte, that would actually pick up that exact detail. If you notice on this one is actually glossy. And so the exact same mixture into two different molds, this guy is the glossy one. And so the glossy guy here, you can see definitely a glossy surface finish. And this one is definitely a matte finish. So it's really important to save time and effort. If you can decide ahead of time, what do I really want that to look like? Because you can definitely get different outcomes. And these have the exact same mixture poured into two different surfaces. So you can see one's matte and one's gloss. That purple piece that I had showed you, if I had decided to put that pearly blue on the outside of the material, I might get a surface like this, where it's a very pretty, like pearlescent look. So completely different looks when I look at the two of these, same powder, but this is actually on the outside. And look at that beautiful pearlescence versus adding a little bit of color and mixing it inside. So you can really get multiple effects with just a little bit of powder and using a different resin that makes sense for your project. And we do have a whole bunch of different casting effects that you can do, with that. So if there's any questions about the casting materials or the mold materials, I can answer some of those, or I can move on to the next part.
There were a couple of questions.
Okay.
One was, it was kind of at the very beginning on your bracelet. What color did you use to make that, and what material?
This one, the yellow one. So
Yeah.
I did honestly like two techniques. So I used, because I love neon and I love I love glow in the dark. So I used our glowworm, which is our glowworm yellow, which is, we have blue and yellow. The glowworm yellow powder, I mixed that inside of a urethane resin called Smoothcast 45D. 45D is actually one of our semi-rigids. So instead of being rigid, if you can see it, I'm going to try to hold it to the camera, make it my hand. So see, I can squeeze it a little. That's why I used it, because my hand isn't big, but you know, getting one of these bangles over your wrist kind of hurts. So I used something that gave me a little bit of semi-rigidity. And then on top of the glowworm, I actually boosted that by using our Ignite neon yellow, which again, one of my loves. I have this UV light here. So I, just in case, I brought this UV flashlight. And if you can see, I can make it glow. If you can see it glow, like I'm trying to make it glow really bright. And the ignites, those colorants get excited with UV light. So if you go to like Disneyland or one of those theme parks and you see things glowing in the dark, some of them are glow in the dark, but many of them are actually reacting to the UV black light on there. And so I think you can kind of see that glow there, but that's kind of both.
Yeah.
I kind of have it just in general neon, and then I have the glowworm powders in that material. So it's kind of cool.
Awesome.
So as far as that option. And there was another question?
There was one other, yeah, there's a couple more. One was about mixing the powders. So,
Yes.
and you can just, instead of just using one, you can pre-mix those together.
Yes.
The powders, instead of just,
for
using,
instance,
like say bronze, you could use.
Yeah. If I wanted to do, for some crazy reason, the pearly blue and bronze, yes. And they're very fine mica powders. And so I could technically mix them together if I wanted to. Same with the colorants. Like if I wanted to do So Strong purple and So Strong black for some reason. The biggest thing as far as the colorants would be, don't overload the system. So no more than 3% of the total weight. So if I have 100 grams of my total weight for the resin, I don't want to go more than 3 grams total of my colorant. So whatever combination of colorants, 1 or 20 colors, just don't go over 3%. It won't cure properly, and you'll have a negative outcome most likely. The other thing is I don't really know a high limit as far as the Cast Magic. You can kind of see we use so little of it, but if you add more filler, and let's say as a general rule, the more filler you add, then maybe the less resin you have kind of bonding it together. So if you add like a crazy amount, you could overload the system and it might be a little brittle, but most people are not using a ton of it because they're concentrated as well. A little goes a really long way. So you can combine colorants, you can combine Cast Magics. What I've seen some that look like crazy, like it's like, well, that didn't turn out how I wanted. And then I've seen some that are like inspired, that look really cool.
Awesome. Thank you.
Was there another question?
I think a lot of the other questions are being answered in the chat. So
as we kind of go. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. If there's something, and a lot of times I try to repeat things a couple times, mainly because it's kind of like the repetition helps, because if someone remembers how to do it, it'll lessen their chance of forgetting later when they're working on it. But it's also something even with experience, sometimes the more experience you have, you kind of forget some things. So doing it in a methodical way, like you saw me put the colorants into B every time. That's my thing. And that's what we recommend. It helps. You're getting into this rhythm of how do I do it? That way you're not forgetting or missing something or not doing it right. And pretty much all of the things apply to almost everything. The 73 degrees Fahrenheit is where you store and use the material. Pre-mixing, whether that's stirring or shaking, those type of things apply across the board. So it's definitely something that, like I mentioned earlier, kind of equating it with cooking. You take those same techniques. You go too hot, you burn something. The same idea, where the techniques apply across the board, depending on what you're doing. Are there any more questions maybe about the mold rubbers or any other techniques?
There was one more kind of more in detail, the question about mixing the powders. The person was wanting to make a darker bronze. Is there like a black powder that they could mix with the bronze powder to make it darker, or is there just another option?
You can do it in a couple different ways. I would first experiment with what color you use behind it and what resin you use behind it. So the question was kind of like, how do I make a darker bronze? Because our bronze Zonker, it can look a little bright compared to what you want your bronze to look like. So if you use a lighter color versus a darker color, an opaque versus a resin that's clear, you are going to get a different outcome. Personally, I feel like the darker the better, but at the same time, for me to make it darker would easily be done by post finishing it, by putting like an acrylic or an enamel paint on that, and that way when you color it, you can, if it's too much, you can wipe it off before it dries, or you can, you know, just buff down the highlights so that it sinks in, things like that. You can also experiment with, instead of putting it just on the surface, you can try to mix it into something like 325, which is a clear, the clear amber, and try to get it where you mix it in with a tiny bit of black. You don't want to go too dark because then it could look funny, but a lot of those color experimentations and cast magic powder experimentations, they're nuance. A lot of them are nuances because the colorants, you know, they're concentrated and you don't need a lot of powder, and it's just about how much you do. We also have real bronze. I mean, we also offer real metal powders, and that's a whole nother ball game. But that's a whole nother thing that you can do as well, which is the metal cold casting. So the next thing I was going to talk about is something that you actually may not think is related, but it is related, and it's 3D printing. So, you know, how does that fit into mold making and casting? Well, I would say, especially in recent years, 3D printing has become a lot more accessible to people. And so a lot of people have their own personal printers and do their own designing and printing at home. They might have one at work, or they might have something printed for them. Maybe they're not sure how to use the design programs, so they're going to have something printed for them from a 3D printing company that will provide them with an original model. And so how that fits into the mold making and casting world is sometimes that's expensive. It takes a lot of money sometimes, or someone doesn't know how to design something to print something that they want. So they only have one that they can spend the money on and the time on to print out. Another reason that someone might do it is they want many, many, many of them. And so to make many, many, many is expensive. Even just the one might be pricey, but they want to make many of them for whatever reason. And so that's something that can be limiting. And so, you know, obviously our mold making material comes into it to where you could actually make molds of those 3D prints. There are people who also will, instead of 3D printing the original model, they'll go the complete opposite direction, and they're going to 3D print the mold itself. And I have some examples to show you, actually. So I want to show you a couple things. So this is my 3D printing world right here. When people do the 3D printing, there's a couple different types of 3D printing. So I'm going to say probably the most popular type of 3D printing that's most accessible to people is the FDM printing, which is when you see those layer lines. So you look very closely, and depending on the quality of the print, you might see layer lines on them that show, you know, as it's 3D printing, it's doing layer by layer by layer. Usually it's using something like PLA or ABS. Those are the types of filament that are used in 3D printing. But in the end, when they have their original model 3D printed, nobody really wants, I mean, some people might, but nobody really wants the 3D printed lines, because then you know it's a 3D print. It doesn't look as smooth or as awesome as you want. And so, you know, what do? Yeah, I can make a mold of it, which is fine. I can then, maybe I'll make a quick mold of that and finish it, but then I'd have to keep post-finishing each time to fix those lines. A smarter solution would be fix it and make it perfect, and then make a mold of it. Now from that mold, instead of spending many, many hours printing them one by one, or paying someone else to print them for you, which can be costly, you can use one of our materials that's called XTC 3D. And so this is the XTC 3D. And what this is, this little skull that's on the box, I actually have it like right here. So we can talk about that in a minute. But so the XTC 3D is basically a protective coating. You can use it for creating effects, or you can actually use it to just fill in the layer lines. And these layer lines, they're not like crazy thick, but you can feel them. And so I want to just kind of, if you could hear it, can you hear the layer lines? There's actually like a sound, you know, because there's layers and I can feel them. And you can actually hear them and see them most of the time. It might be hard to see all the detail, but yeah, there's layer lines. So this skull, it's one of the skulls that was used on the artwork here. This was a 3D printed piece that had the layer lines, which you could definitely feel. And we wanted to show a couple different options as far as finishing. And so with this particular material, we coated it with the XTC 3D, and I'm going to show you how to do that afterwards. But when it's coated with the XTC 3D, it is like a crazy, crazy thin line. We're talking like the layer that you're putting on there is maybe 1/64th of an inch, which is like nothing. And that's what you want. I mean, the idea is not to make it crazy thick. You are basically filling in those tiny, tiny striation marks or layer lines that are on these 3D castings or 3D prints in order to smooth it out and make it have the appearance that you want. So with this, you can see one side is gloss and one side is matte. And believe it or not, they're actually coated with the same material. But once this is fully cured, just like all those urethane resins cured, this XTC 3D, it's actually an epoxy. When it fully cures, you can actually sand it if you wanted to, because it's a hard plastic coating. It's a protective layer. It does help make this more strong. I've had some 3D printed parts break. Maybe someone drops them and they break. And so adding this protective layer gives you just that little measure of help with that, just in case, the other thing is I can make it a matte finish, or I can make it a gloss finish. It's really easy to sand this down, and you're wearing, a dust mask, but you sand it down and you can get a really nice matte finish with it. Or when you actually just brush it on by itself, it creates a beautiful gloss finish. The cool thing about this too is you can use the XTC 3D to coat with powders. That could be the Cast Magic powders. It could also be real powders, like real metal powders. It could be glow in the dark powders, you name it. It's really neat because you can mix it in and make a thin layer and actually create a really cool outcome. And like I said, this could be my one and only, and it's like super perfect and beautiful. Or my only function is not an appearance, but I want to make it perfectly smooth and perfect so I can make a mold of it now. And so a lot of people come to us for that reason, and which is why we developed the XTC 3D product and why it's really popular, because it's a simple way to get that done. If you use 1 ounce of this material, and 1 ounce is just this tiny little amount. 1 ounce is just basically this little tiny little medicine cup. 1 ounce is going to coat about 100 square inches, actually 101. So, I mean, that's crazy. That's like a lot. But remember, you're going crazy thin also. You don't want to sit there and build up layer lines, because if someone's using this for prototyping or inventing or something like that, you don't want to change the tolerance at all. I wanted to show you also this. This is some type of engine part, but this actually was coated with real aluminum powder with the XTC 3D. It's very lightweight because it's 3D printed, but this is actually real metal. And when people touch it, you actually feel the coldness of a real metal, and people are just blown away by it because it's just a tiny little layer, very affordable way to make real metal castings. And so that's another thing that people can do. I also wanted to try to show you, when we were talking about making 3D printed molds, sometimes the expense of an original model and then a mold and then this and that, people don't want to do that. So they just go directly to 3D printing the mold. And so this is a 3D printed mold. And what this is actually, I poured some silicone into it just to show you. And so I poured it right in, and now I don't even have to make the mold because I've got the mold. It's done. If there are layer lines in here that I don't want, I could also coat the surface of this mold and get rid of those lines, or maybe I don't care and I just think they look cool. It just depends on what you want to do. But the XTC 3D is really helpful with trying to solve that problem that people sometimes have with the 3D layer lines. The other cool thing that people like to do is, we were talking about the 3D printed molds. So here's a 3D printed soap mold. So 3D printed mold. Into this mold, I printed a mold of a mold, right? So what happens is now when I pour silicone into it and I demold, I have the mold that makes molds. So now I can make a ton of molds. Maybe I have a soap business or some kind of business where I just wanted to make a bunch of molds. In that mold now, I can make, just like the Cast Magic, multiple type of castings. So it really trickles down about where the XTC 3D fits in, because this surface was actually coated with the XTC 3D in order to get rid of the layer lines that had come up from the printing. So, depending on where you want to go with it, a lot of this really fits into the mold making and casting world. And I wanted to show you how you can coat something pretty quickly and easily. And so I have a little pumpkin to show you. And I'm going to show you how to use the XTC 3D with it, the XTC 3D with the Cast Magic powders. I also have some of our UVO colorant, which is what we recommend using with the XTC 3D. And the UVO colorant is a UV resistant colorant. And I think it does give some really vibrant colors, which I'm going to show you. So let me move this, and then I'm going to get my little guy out and show you what to do here. So when you're using this, and again, if you can hear this, these are the layer lines that happen from some 3D printing technologies. The layer lines just basically happen as a result of tiny, tiny layers of plastic being filament that get melted. They build the layers based on the design that's programmed, and it creates something like this awesome pumpkin. If I wasn't happy with this pumpkin as is, I might just be like, cool, it's a cool orange pumpkin, I'm happy. If I wanted to just create a display piece for fall, I could coat the entire thing with one color. Maybe I want to coat this thing with glow powder. I could use XTC3 and do that. Or I might go, I have a haunt and I really need to make a lot of these because I need to make a display area. You could then coat this to get rid of the layer lines, make it perfect, and then make a mold of this entire piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a little bit of an idea of how that you can do that. And I wanted to show you also this. Why do I have this? It's not a hat. So this is an aluminum foil tray, very easy to make. Just literally fold some aluminum foil, make a little tray. I'm going to use this tray in conjunction with using my XTC 3D. And so I wanted to show you how I do that. Let me get some of my pieces out here. And so I have, this is Gold Rush. So the Gold Rush is actually one of our Cast Magic. I just wanted to try something different. So I have the Gold Rush. And then I have my XTC 3D. And this is actually measured 1 part A to 1 part B by volume. So I'm going to quickly do this. So all I'm going to do is basically mix these together, add the powder, and you're good to go. So let me quickly do that. And make sure I have my mixing sticks here. So I'm going to use my little mixing container, just this little guy, tiny little cup, 2A to 1B by volume. And I'm going to put my powder in there first. You can kind of decide how much you want. I'm going to put that in there. And then I'm going to, again, pre-mix it just like I would with the color. At this point, I could add color if I wanted to, but I kind of want you to see what it looks like just in a clear material. Because if I didn't use anything like you saw with that skull, it is a clear material. So I'm going to pre-mix that in there. I have my 1 part A. I'm going to put that in there. Or excuse me, 1 part A, 2 parts A, 1 part B. And I'm going to mix those in. Boom, good to go. Stir this up. Once I stir this up, I have, we'll consider this a mass, even though it's tiny. But once I stir this up in a mass, I have maybe 10 minutes to work with this, which is actually tons of time. But if I wanted to thin this out, that's where this tray comes in. So I dump this in the tray, and you want to stir that for maybe about a minute or so, just to get a good mix. By putting it in this tray, this is where the mass comes into it. I'm lowering the mass by spreading it out. And so I'm also further not trying to build the tolerance by using this foam stick. So the foam stick is basically going to just kind of shovel and smooth the layer lines in. So I'm going to show you real quick. You can do, if you want, you can do a minimum of 1. I usually do 2 or 3, depending on how thick I go. But I just want to show you how quickly, and again, I'm going thin. I don't want to go thick. So I'm just showing you how quickly and easily this is. Like I could coat this whole thing like crazy fast. If I wanted to, I would probably want to wait for my next layer. I might wait like 1.5 hours to 2 hours, depending on how thin I go, before I come and recoat. But in the end, maybe 3.5, 4 hours later, this whole thing would be fully cured. And I can just keep adding to it in that way. So just so that you can see, that's just 1 layer. I could come back and do a whole nother layer. The other one I wanted to show you real quick would be the UVO. So the UVO, I picked red. This is like my favorite red color. So as far as the UVOs, I think it's a beautiful cherry. I'm going to add that color in. No Cast Magic. And I'll put some of that in there. This gives really nice coverage as well. And so I got my little guy here. I'm going to stir this up. If you use like a chip brush instead, watch for the bristles because they get stuck in there. You know, most people like to use the little foam brushes, but sometimes it's just a personal preference as to why you're doing whatever you want to do. So I'm going to pre-mix that. I'm going to put this in my B. So A and B, 2 parts of A, 1 part of B, mix this in. Once this is done, again, I have a little special tray that I made ahead of time that'll slow my time down. So I have maybe 15 minutes to work with it in the tray. And then after I mix it thoroughly, again, scraping the sides and the bottoms, I'm going to dump it in, let it spread out a little bit, and then dip my tray. Once I start applying this again, I'm going to probably come back maybe in an hour and a half, 2 hours, and I'm going to coat it one more time. So here I go. I'm coating this. It does give pretty nice coverage rate because the UVO does tend to give an opaque look, which is really nice. If I wanted to be happy and step away with 1 layer, you know, that's up to you and your own decision with it. But again, once this is fully cured, you know, if you have a little bit of a thicker layer, you can actually sit there and sand it back if you wanted to. You will lose the glossy finish, but you know, that's something that you can do. So let's say we flash forwarded and I made a little sample for you guys to see of the cured pieces. Booyah! So this is basically, I have 1, 2, 3 and 1, 2, 3. So I just wanted to, hopefully you can see it. So I did 1 layer clear just so that you can see. It's just 1 layer of just really clear. I added a 2nd layer of the UVO, and then I added a 3rd layer, which is a tiny, tiny bit thicker. With this one, you can see because I just added the powder and no colorant, I still have just that 1 layer. And then I did this guy here and this guy here, just so that you can see that you can slowly build it up. And the idea is not to glob it all on. Like, you're not trying to sit there and make it as fast as you can because it will pool at the bottom. You can kind of see where my piece is pooled, where it just drips down. So the idea is to go really thin. And again, the XTC 3D, just an ounce will cover 101 square inches, which at 1/64 of an inch, which is really nice. So it's definitely an option for people as a part of their mold making and casting experience, depending on what they're doing. So that pretty much wraps up, what I've got here, unless there's some questions to answer.
I think we've covered most of the questions.
Okay, perfect.
On my end. Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much. This is super
no worries. Yeah, and so if someone, has follow-up questions or they want to learn more, we do offer free technical support, and someone could either give us a call on our toll-free tech line, or from, our website, smoothon.com, and find basically our email support if they prefer to do it that way, and we can work on their projects with them and help them guide them to the right projects.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. All right, thanks everyone for watching.
All right, take care.
We'll go ahead and end the video.
Thanks. Bye.